Hey, you guys know Superman? Yeah, what if he stood against caste systems and private police forces?
Do 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 do.
Okay, I know that take is a little disingenuous since the mainline Superman would be doing all of those things anyways, but just hear me out. Absolute Superman Volume 1 collects issues 1 through 6 of Absolute Superman by Jason Aaron, and I liked it. I liked it a lot, but I didn't love it as much as I loved Absolute Superman and Absolute Wonder Woman. Which is weird because in the mainline universe, Superman is my favorite out of the three, and I don't really care for Batman or Wonder Woman all that much. Whereas Absolute Batman and Absolute Wonder Woman were complete and total subversions of the traits we associate with the character, Absolute Superman, aside from his origin, kind of isn't really all that different from the mainline Superman.
Future editor here. This is such a brain dead take they ended up doubling back on later in the video because I realized that it's just straight up not true. Pay no attention to what I just said and carry on. Thank you.
There are some differences that, differentiate the character, obviously. Like, Absolute Superman seems to be much younger. He still has a much more adolescent, more naive kind of mindset than the mainline Superman. And they've altered and tweaked some of his powers here and there, but where the main differences lie are in his origins on Krypton. Now, a lot of the same stuff that we still associate with Krypton is still there. It was still a science-based, religious, deeply, deeply science-based religious planet, and that was its overall downfall. It was their sort of cognitive bias to the environmental factors around them that resulted in Krypton exploding. And that still happens here, and that's fine. If there's nothing wrong with the source material, then don't change the source material. They make little tweaks here and there to make it more interesting. For example, Clark's dad was not involved, or I guess he's not even called Clark in this universe, he's just Kal-El, since he lands on Earth as like a 17-year-old, I think is what it looks like. Kal-El's dad was not part of the Science League like he was in the mainline universe. Instead, he was a sunstone miner, and his mother was supposed to become a member of the Science League, but wrote a very controversial paper at 9 years old that sort of banished her from ever rising past that, and she was forced to be an extremely talented engineer for the remainder of her lifespan. And it was due to the sort of caste system that exists on Krypton that Kal-El was forced to grow up on the bottom of the ladder. And while this is an extremely interesting concept, and I love that we get to see so much of Krypton before it explodes in this universe, Clark just kind of ends up going down the same route anyways. He still lands on Earth, he still has to learn how to control his powers, and he still ends up becoming a symbol of hope in a world without it. It's just the journey there is a little bit different. It's still equally as enjoyable, and I still enjoyed the story, but if the end result is still the same, then what was really the point? Then again, I've only read the first volume, so things could obviously change. Status quos could be flipped on their heads later on in the run. I guess I'll just have to find out. And that's another thing I wanted to mention. It's probably the weakest first arc out of all of the Absolute titles that I've read so far, which is only the original 3. And that's because it doesn't really have any actual conclusion. The first 6 issues just feel like one really big setup for the rest of the story. And if you're reading these monthly, I'm sure that's not an issue, but when I'm collecting this in a trade paperback format, that's more of a personal issue with me. But because that's a me thing, I'm not going to hold that against the book at large. If you're collecting monthly, I'm sure that issue just doesn't exist. Obviously, you can't appeal to everyone in this industry. Now, if you were to ask me what Absolute Superman is about, I'd say it's 4 things: identity, hope, truth, and the preservation of our planet. When Kal-El lands on Earth, he immediately starts interacting with the lower class members of society, the sort of impoverished people among us, and everywhere from first world countries to third world countries, and he does anything he can to help them. He lives among the people that society has cast out and no longer wants to speak to or hear from, which is sort of where we get to the aspect of truth in this book. One of the reoccurring themes is truth in writing. For example, Kal-El's mother was banned from ever doing any kind of science because of her controversial paper. When Kal-El was in school, he was deeply criticized and was actively punished for not using the active resources to write his papers in school, and instead speaking his truth from his experiences, which is not what the school wanted to hear. And later on, when Kal-El is on Earth, we see that the Lazarus Corporation is actively using what is called the Brainiac system to write reports for their soldiers. There's actually a really touching moment where we see Lois Lane write a paper for her very first time and how much she loves it. And reading this book in the year of our Lord 2025, I can't help but feel like there's some sort of commentary on generative AI here. Everyone in the Lazarus Corporation talks about just how convenient the Brainiac system is and how it does their job for them, but ultimately it's not benefiting them. All it does is confirm its own biases that actively paint the Lazarus Corporation in a positive light. And that takes me to the next point I want to talk about, the Lazarus Corp. To go and make Ra's al Ghul a traditionally Batman villain and sort of mold him into a Superman villain is really, really interesting. Having Ra's al Ghul represent the sort of dangers of unchecked capitalism is honestly genius on a writing perspective. Especially for a character like Superman who, in this timeline, was forced to watch his planet rot from the inside out as the people up top denied it was ever happening. To quote directly from the book, if something was sick inside the planet, it would make sense that the first people to feel the pain would be the ones with their hands in the dirt. Growing up lower class on Krypton, Clark was able to see and experience so much more than most other Kryptonians. In fact, it's actually his dad who discovers that the planet is rotting from the inside out first, since he was working in sunstone mines. And what happens to Clark's dad when he takes this information to the Science League to try to save his planet? He's actively arrested under religious heresy. Because the Science League knew all along. The Science League was building rocket ships to escape Krypton, but only for themselves and the higher among them. They do not care about the lower caste members of society. They were willing to leave people like Kal-El and his family on that planet to die, because it was more convenient just to save themselves. So naturally, when Kal-El lands on Earth and sees that Lazarus Corp is doing exactly what the Science League was doing and was manipulating information to the masses so they wouldn't realize all of the horrific things they were doing to the environment and the people and the locals, Kal-El can't let that stand. This is what makes Lazarus Corp such a good foil for Superman. Lazarus Corp also has its own form of privatized military in the Peacemakers. Psychotic individuals who are trained to protect peace at any cost. But their definition of peace is whatever Lazarus Corp's definition of peace is. The Peacemakers do not make peace, Superman makes peace. Not to the highest bidder like the Peacemakers, but to the people who really need it. Superman has traveled the world helping the impoverished among us. He has learned their languages, he has enveloped themselves in their cultures. And as soon as he thinks that they're saved, he goes to the next country, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. Throughout the book, we see all the lives that Kal-El has touched, and it's honestly beautiful. This is going to sound ridiculous, but I'm feeling my opinion on the book change as I'm actively talking about it.
Told you.
What makes this Superman different is that this is a Superman who is bitter. He is tired. He is sick and tired of seeing worlds die needlessly. He can't help but help everyone around him. But in a way, I can't help but shake the feeling that this Superman has no interest in being a symbol of hope. He is not here to inspire people, he is here to save people. He does not view himself as this symbol, just someone who has the means and the ability and will use it no matter what. That being said, the book is not without some issues. For example, the art on this is amazing, but I still feel that it is the weakest out of the three main books. Not bad by any means, not by any stretch of the imagination. I just think, relatively speaking, it's not up to par with what we've seen in Absolute Batman, and especially what we see in Absolute Wonder Woman. Is it a nitpick? Sure, but nitpicking is how I get views, damn it. The overall message of the book is not subtle whatsoever. It is very, very, very direct and very in your face about it. And while I take no issue with that, haters will call this woke. The book very quickly mentions the Omega Men, and we see them once. They're sort of like this resistance group that also fights against the Lazarus Corp. Jimmy Olsen is a member of it, actually, but they're never really fully explained, and we kind of see them like once and then hear people talk about them in passing, which, again, if you're reading that monthly, that's not an issue, but for someone like me who prefers collecting these things in trade, I would like to learn more about the Omega Men. Sucks, because I'm not going to be able to learn more until like February of next year. And I'm kind of going back and forth on whether that's a valid criticism or not, as I'm very critical of books like Ultimate Wolverine that are very clearly made for trade and don't really function as a monthly series. As someone who prefers collecting monthly, I have an issue with books that are made for trade. Whereas when it comes to something with the Absolute books where I prefer collecting them as trade, I kind of have an issue when they're made for monthly, which is understandably, I'm being nitpicky. I know that I can't, it would be very difficult to write a book that functions both ways. So I can't really dog on it that hard for that reason. Overall, I would give Absolute Superman Volume 1 an 8.5 out of 10. It's really good, but I didn't like it as much as I like Absolute Wonder Woman and Absolute Batman. Now, if I had to give Absolute Superman Volume 1 a rating, I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. It's still really good, and I highly recommend you check it out, but I did not really enjoy it as much as I liked Wonder Woman and Batman. That's all I have for this week, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know what you want to see in the future. Have a nice day.